I would like to apologize. Sometime in between uploading the videos to my computer and going to make do the editing, the videos for part 2, most of them at least, have gone missing. I don't know what happened. They are not on my computer. They are not on the device that was used to record. I can't identify. I don't know where they've gone. So until I don't have pieces with which to demonstrate the process. So I'm gonna have to just give you a general description of what you need to do. You can see some of what I'm going to describe in use in other videos. Please, as I've said before, watch everything so you have the best knowledge possible. Now, the first thing you need to do is to finish your various pieces. If you've taken my advice and used E6000 and the E6000 has overflown, you have a rubberized surface you need to clear off each piece. I use a metal file, and if you move back and forth, it's at first a dull. There's a bit of resistance to you, and you get a bit of a dull kind of rubbing sound. And as you work it pretty quickly, you will start to get a rough sound from the file, and that is the sound of you actually touching plastic. And then when you pull away, you can see a lot of plastic has detached itself from the piece, and you can easily just pull that away. It can be done to just pull it away in general with your fingers if you've got fingernails. You can cut it away with an X-Acto knife. If you're really, really persistent, you can get at it with some sandpaper. So those are the ways to handle that. Now, you'll want to, before you move on, you'll want to fill the gaps. That is to say, sometimes, maybe you didn't put enough glue down to fill it. You've got a bit of an imperfect print. And so there's a small gap. You'll need to fill that gap with something. There is a number of ways you can do that. Plenty of filler material exists at your hardware store. Later in this video, with the surviving piece of the part 2 video, I will show you how to use Allure, which is E6000 and paint combined, to fill those gaps. As far as putting the pieces together, part 2, you need to put the tines on the body. You will see a finished piece later in my commentary on filler material. You'll see what it's supposed to look like. Simply put, you take your combined one piece and put it on the left side with the B attachment point placed on the body, and your 2s, the B attachment point, placed on the right side of the body. It's pretty obvious which way it goes. If you've seen the movie, you know which way that's supposed to curve, what the front of the gun is supposed to be. They need to curve toward the front of the gun. So it shouldn't be too hard to put them together. Do note that there are no alignment pins, and so it's actually, I couldn't get some alignment pins to line up properly. So when you're putting on those clamps, you have to be very careful because this will shift as you're putting on the clamps. There's nothing to keep it from shifting, except for you. In part 3 of this video, I briefly discussed this, but one of the techniques is, after you've held them together, if you take a paper towel, you can press. You can press on either side of the seam and line it up. And you can even sometimes do that after it's clamped if you're careful, and get a successful to adjust that clamping a little bit. Again, try not to get the glue all over your fingers. It's not harmful. It doesn't bond instantly, so you're not going to get the situation where you super glue your fingers together. It's just uncomfortable. It's hard to get off. So you know, you don't want it there. All right, one last thing before we move on to the third part. There's one thing I didn't cover that you might want to do. I've never actually done it in this order, but I've realized it's probably the better order to do this. One thing you might want to consider: slight imperfections in the printing process can sometimes lead to mild gaps. Hopefully when we that by overfilling you will get none of these, but sometimes that's unavoidable. But there is a solution as I've mentioned before, and you might want to do it before you start trying to put other pieces on this, just so it's a little less wieldy. And that is, you need a filler material. There are plenty of filler materials in your hardware store. E6000 works just fine as a filler material. The only problem with E6000 is it does have that dry time. So rather than deal with the dry time of E6000, I've got something different. E6000. This is Allure paint. It is E6000 glue combined with a paint. In this case, it is a metallic gold. You certainly don't need the metallic gold, but it doesn't cost anything extra. And I have a weird thing about everything I do, including the materials I use being gold colored. This is officially a gold colored filament. I know it doesn't quite look it, but that's the color labeling. This is a gold metallic paint. Not necessary, I'm going to be painting over everything, but this is good. Now, small gaps, like what you'll see here, let's see if I can get this. Small gaps, sometimes they need covering, sometimes they don't, oftentimes they don't. The paint, when you spray paint this, it'll actually cover that up. It'll span that gap and you won't have a problem. But when gaps start to get a little too big, you're going to want this. And certainly more is not going to harm the final product. It's a very simple process. Oops. You want to take, so you've got this surface here, you take your glue, and you just kind of apply along the crack. Now what we're doing is we're not gluing them together, we're not painting this surface. What we are doing with the application of, now you can leave it bold sometime, if you wipe it very lightly, you'll push it into the crack and it'll produce a smooth surface. Or you can leave it exposed like this. Either way works, just like with the E6000 normally. You just let it dry. This stuff it says 4 to 5 hours. I have clearly, I have manipulated it in 2 to 3, just with no problems. So you shouldn't have too many problems. Let that dry. File it, sand it off, cut it off, whatever you do. I do not recommend trying to peel this with your fingers. You run the risk of pulling the material that is in the crack out. You don't run that risk quite, with the seams here with the normal E6000, because of the clamps and the pressure, there isn't a lot of there. There's a big hole. You're not really filling this hole. You're just kind of covering it up. If you want to use a different type of filler material, maybe something with a tiny point that you can actually inject into that hole, certainly feel free. I just don't see a need to be that thorough. Just closing the surface is enough. So now we move on to step 3.